All right. Welcome to the Leaders Lab, Richard. Good to have you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ken. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Yeah, no problem. Well, as our audience heard in the intro, I mean, from a kid with autism to working with monks to becoming a speechwriter and somebody who trains others to do the same things and increase their income as a result. That's not a typical, linear path, if you will. So can you talk to us maybe about, how all of this came to be and maybe growing up with some of the, I want to say disadvantages, but they turned out to be your advantages, I guess. But tell me about some of the challenges when you were younger and how that led to where you are now.
Sure. I mean, well, I think I've heard it said quite a few times that, when people are passionate about teaching something, then it's often because they want to scratch their own itch, and then they figure something out and then they want to share it with others. And that's very much been true for me and what I've loved to work on with our clients. And I think it's very empowering for them too, when they're coming to me struggling with communication in some way, and they say, well, it must be easy for you, Richard, but I've got these challenges. And I can say to them, no, let me tell you where I came from. So, back from a very early age, I realized that I had challenges with communication and I didn't really know what they were at the time. And so, as I often tell people, when I was just nearly 5 years old, so 4 going on 5, we moved to a new part of the country. I changed school, and I remember going into this school, and the first day I was sort of dropped off by my parents thinking, wow, this is amazing, I'm really looking forward to being here. And then I just remember the next memory of the day is when I'm sitting in this little classroom like you have at sort of kindergarten, and I was trying to talk to the kids around me, and for some reason I was completely unable to connect with them. I felt totally isolated, like I was in a glass bubble, just not knowing what to do to build up a friendship or a connection with someone else, and burst into tears. And it was a terrible first experience. And going through the years, then moving upwards through the years to when I was a teenager, I was very awkward. I didn't really know how to build relationships and do banter and do all the other things that my friends were doing, and always came at things from a much more sort of logical perspective. And it'd be many, many years later. So it's only when I was 44 that I was actually diagnosed autistic, which suddenly made sense of everything that had happened to me back then. But back when I was late teenage years, a friend of mine bought me a book on body language. And she said, I think this might help you. You might like it. And I really loved it. I mean, I read it cover to cover several times, making lots of notes on it, thinking this is the Holy Grail. This is it. This is now helping me understand what is going on in the world around me, and started to devour books on the subject to the point where I'd read over 200 books on communication, looking through body language, voice, stage presence, storytelling, breath work, anything that I thought would help me understand what it's like to communicate and connect with others and what that was all about and the research behind it. And then meanwhile, while I was at school, I had started this passion for teaching, which really came out of being terrible at basketball. So what had happened is that when I was, I was 12 years old, I loved the idea of playing basketball, and we started to play, but we were playing teams. For some reason, my school didn't teach us as early as other schools were starting to learn basketball. So we're playing teams that had much more experience, and we got completely destroyed. And so when I was at the highest years of my school, I thought, I'm going to teach the youngest years basketball, because that way they won't get thrashed in the same way that we were.
Sure.
And so that felt very, very rewarding. And then all my friends were going off to university, and I thought, I don't want to do that. I want to give back. I want to help people who need some sort of help, because I'd had a very comfortable upbringing. And I applied for roles, and eventually was offered this opportunity to go to the foothills of the Himalayas, where I lived up in northeast India, in a little place called Kalimpong, which is very close to Darjeeling, which is where the tea comes from. And I was living there with these monks, where I didn't realize before I got there, but when I got there, I found out they didn't speak any English. So they spoke Tibetan, Nepali, and Hindi, no English. And I had to then figure out, well, how do I communicate with them to help them learn English so that they can sort of integrate with the area they were in and look for sponsors to support them. And so we had to use body language and tone of voice, just non-verbal communication, to figure out how to connect with each other, which proved to be a big challenge at the start, but by the end it was very successful. So by the end of 6 months of living with him, so just to give people the picture, this is 6 months living in a monastery with people who didn't speak any English, where there was no Wi-Fi. This is pre-internet. I didn't have a mobile phone. We had a phone line within the monastery that maybe worked for 5 minutes a week if we were careful with it. We barely had electricity as well. And by the end of that, they were having this good conversation in English with me, and I've kept in touch with them ever since. And so I came back to the UK. I then studied acting. I'd always been passionate about trying to figure out how to express myself. Went to a brilliant London acting school, and then the last piece of the puzzle really that got me to where I am now is that my hairdresser, one day, he was hearing what I'd done. He said, wow, you've been teaching, you've learned acting. Come and teach my hairdressers how to act a bit more professionally in their hair salon, because they're like London streetwise teenagers. They don't know really how to connect. And he offered me a free haircut to do it. And I did it. And I loved the experience. I found it a bit stressful, but I did love it. And they loved it too. And they kept on inviting me back. And very soon, by word of mouth spreading from that hair salon to the people, like the clients who were coming in, getting their hair cut, I started getting other opportunities. I set up a website, and we've now trained 120,000 people all over the world in communication.
What's the time frame been from the hair salon impromptu kind of coaching session till now?
So that was 23 years ago.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
When did it become a career? When did it, because it was very part-time, and then when did you kind of say, okay, this is my path now? And I'm guessing it was probably a slow ramp up where maybe some revenue built over time, yeah?
Yeah, it was, because at first I didn't really know what it was. I didn't expect it to become something. It was very much a hobby. And I think it was really the first 5 years where it was still kind of a hobby. And it was at that point where I'd met my wife to be back then, and she was not that interested in me doing the acting work I was doing, but she was really excited about this idea of this business that I seemed to have that was picking up some speed around the communication, which she thought was pretty cool. So I got encouragement from her. I got encouragement from my dad as well, who had been in business all his life and was giving me some ideas about going to networking events and how to get a website going and so on. And through their support and encouragement, and through the momentum of clients picking up, it got to the stage where I thought, this is really going somewhere. And then I started to need more people, and I've built a team up now of 20 people who work with me doing the same thing.
That's awesome. When you were a kid, going through what you went through, and again later finding out some of the challenges, but was this search that you were on, like, for better communication? How were you feeling at that time? Like, were you growing up, I guess what I'm getting, and I just want to, I don't know if I have it right or not, is, it sounds like, were you a pretty lonely kid, like, because you were having trouble communicating with others?
Yeah, I think I was fortunate to have at each different stage sort of one or two close friends, who seemed to get me, who seemed to understand me. At the places where I really struggled would be social events, where I'd be sitting at, and I'll say at this stage, I was shy as a child, as well as being autistic, as well as being highly introvert. So I had all those three sort of going on. And I would sit, say, at a dinner party or something, and I'd be listening to the conversation thinking, oh, wow, I'm really interested. I really like these people. I like being here. I don't know how to join this conversation. I don't know where the on-ramp is. Everybody else seems to know how to get into it and how to be involved in it. And I'm sitting here listening to it. And occasionally people would say to me, why are you so quiet, Richard? Like, why don't you say anything? And I'd think, well, my mind is busy with lots of opinions, things I'd like to share. But by the time I get to a point where I think I could share it, the conversation is like 10 minutes down the line. Yeah. So it was like that for me.
I've had friends like that, and I think we've all felt that way at times, right? It just depends at different levels, right? If we're out of our comfort zone and you go like, this isn't really my crowd, I don't know if this is my spot, but I think what you're saying is it's like that's the norm, right? The way that you were feeling with this high level of being an introvert. I'm imagining that probably impacted like your dating life and stuff like that as well in your early years.
Yeah, I think part of the communication challenge for me has also been not understanding when somebody implies something. I don't really understand what that means, and if people use phrases that don't actually mean what they say, then those are confusing. So I just take people literally at their word, And so, for example, if somebody says I'm fine, I think, oh, great. When actually maybe they might not be fine. So that becomes a challenge.
I think that might be just part of being a guy versus a girl, right? It's like, oh, I'm fine. I'm like, okay, great. I'll just move on. You know?
I'll give you another example from networking. This is how challenging I found networking to begin with. And where I actually found my space in sort of speech writing and speech delivery is that for me is so much less complicated, because I think I figure out what I'm going to say and I deliver it and people applaud, and that's great.
It's straightforward.
Whereas with networking, yeah, exactly. Yeah, the back and forth in the networking is challenging. The back and forth in different conversations is challenging too. Where I just remember this example recently where I was at a networking event and I was talking to this guy and we're having a good conversation. Someone came over to us too, and he said, "Hey, Richard, can you give us a minute?" And I said, "Sure, I'll give you a minute." And so I went with them to give them a minute of my time. And they started looking at me like, "Why are you still standing here? We told you to give us a minute." And I thought, I've given you at least 2 minutes. Like, I'm being generous. What they actually meant was get lost.
Take a minute. Take a minute off, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, literal communication is very important to me. But then, yeah, coming into dating, it's interesting. Where like with my wife, we nearly didn't get together because when she came up to sort of talk to me in a bar, I found it too difficult to figure out what to say to her. And so I barely responded, and she just walked away. She thought this guy's not interested at all. And it took some matchmaking from a mutual friend of ours to get us to the point where, you know, we got on the on-ramp and started to get along.
Well, it's so cool though, because your story is just really cool because, you know, we're all like really hardwired for community and connection. You know, we're all that way at our core. And you found ways to get there when it didn't naturally exist. And also it makes more sense to me now that you're describing, if you're taking everything literally, like very literally at face value, like you're saying, and you don't really get innuendo or implications, then like you said, speech writing oddly is a pretty good profession for someone like you because it's a specific thing. It's practiced over and over again. There's an exact emotion you're trying to evoke and an exact pattern, an exact speech pattern. But I'm guessing if you gave that same speech and then opened it up for Q&A at the end, it would be like, oh my gosh, right? At that, maybe not now, but certainly back then, like that would be certainly not the most enjoyable part of that process for you, right?
Yeah, well, actually, that's a funny one to go into because a couple of thoughts come up for me. First of all, is that when I'm training people, if I train introverts versus extroverts, I train them differently because I find that introverts will sit in my coaching sessions quite quiet and make a lot of notes. And I'll coach them directly to say, look, this is the structure that you can use to be really engaging. And they listen, they take it in, they stand up and they do it. And it's fantastic. With extroverts, because they enjoy that back and forth energy more with the audience, then I encourage them to bring more of that in, that sense of draw out the crowd, get the engagement, get the conversation going early on so they can feel energized. And then, yeah, for me on stage, when I started to get questions in sessions that I was running, that was pretty challenging to begin with because I thought I haven't had time to process this and now I have to think on my feet. But for now when I'm running it, because I've been doing it 23 years, it's very much like the movie Groundhog Day, where everything that could happen has already happened. Yeah. And so when people start asking the question, I think I've had 400 other people ask that same question. Right. And I'll listen just to see, is it slightly different? Because it could be a slightly different version, but it's got to the point of, you know, of extreme competency on those answers that I'm able to give them what they need.
Have you been able to, through your coaching and through your programs, do you ever work with kids?
Not very often, actually. Yeah, good question. We've occasionally gone into schools to get them engaged with this information because I think it's so valuable for them to start to get a sense of how to, you know, present themselves early on. But the opportunity to work with schools has been very minimal, just based on the curriculum that they've got. And, you know, there's certain benchmarks they're supposed to be hitting. But I think that the earlier age that people get this information, the better. And what I'm doing for my kids, because I have 2 young boys, and we're taking them to Stagecoach, which is an acting academy on weekends, where they get to do shows and they have to deliver lines and think about stage presence. And I think the earlier that any parent can get their kids involved in that sort of thing, all the better, because, you know, what I gained from from 3 years of professional acting training in London, which people around me thought was a disastrous thing to do, because how many actors do we know that are unemployed? Hundreds of thousands who are trying to get work. But I think it is fundamental skills to learn how to communicate. To how do you connect with someone on the stage? How do you take information and bring it to life where hundreds of people are hanging on to your every word? And so that's the kind of piece that I would encourage people to do with their kids early on.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the reason I even asked was exactly what you said, is it's such great information to get to them and great training to get to them when they're young, right? Because I think that feeling of being isolated, first of all, I think we're kind of an extroverted society, or at least we celebrate extroverts more than introverts. I enjoy working. I'm more of an extrovert, but I enjoy working with and being around introverts because I like people that are a little more well thought out, a little less brash, even though I can be brash. I mean, I think maybe I like the opposite or something, or I feel more calm around people that are a little more calm, right? Or a little more well thought out. But there's disadvantages to that sometimes, because again, I feel like the world generally runs on being extroverted for, I don't know, maybe I'm not using my words the best, but for example, if you're a mid-level manager in a 40,000 employee company, highly introverted, but highly skilled. Let's say you're really effective. You're a good leader. You're getting good results, but you're not great at marketing yourself. You're not great at speaking up in meetings. You're not great at, these things, or even average at these things. That's going to be a career killer, and it's bad for you, and it's bad for the company, and it's bad for the world, because you've probably got a lot more to give, right? And I'm sure this is some of what you're trying to bring out of people when you're doing your coaching.
Yeah, I mean, what can I tell you? I think we've trained 120,000 of those exact people.
Okay, that's I just described your demographic.
Yeah. So our clients tend to come with this, where they say, look, we've got a group of people here who are really highly skilled in sort of engineering or in data analysis or in pharmaceuticals or whatever it is. And they have been promoted because they are the very best in their field. But now they've got to that stage where they need to be an ambassador for the company. They need to rally a team. They've got to step up, and they don't have the communication skills to do that. They've had what they needed before because it was very sort of skill driven based on their sort of technical skill. Now they need those, what is so ironically called soft skills, which people find very hard. And so those are the people we work with. And that's what's kept me so passionate about it for 23 years, is that we get to take people who are in that situation, and in the space of 2 days, which is sort of that's the flagship sort of course that we run, we take them from that place of even being, some people are fearful to show up on the course, let alone, go through some of the activities we do. And by the end of it, they have this feeling of total transformation, and that it lasts as well. So I'll give you an example of, there was a client that we worked with. I'd worked with them many times, but I hadn't worked on the initial event for this particular group. And I was there to do the advanced session about 6 months later. And when I walked in the room and I met the group, they said, do you know what's happened to Sarah? And I said, what do you mean? And they said, you cannot believe the transformation she had. Before she first came on this course, she was really struggling. She was stressed. She didn't know, how to express herself. And since doing that 2-day session with your team, she's now in a point where her marriage is better. Her relationship with her kids is better. She's able to win more business. She's happier at work. Her spirit has lifted. And this was, 6 months down the line. And it's that sort of story that we hear repeatedly that I really love, which is giving people a sense of, you can do this. And, human beings are born with an innate ability to connect with other people in a way that other species on Earth don't have. And if you understand, how to come back to those instincts and use what's already inside you and awaken some of that potential, and then add on some strategies, then you can really fly. And particularly for managers where it is critical to them, I love saying to them, look, I'm going to share a strategy with you now that allows you in the space of 3 minutes to prepare what you're going to say in that next team meeting, to compel everyone to listen to you, taking a complex idea and making it concise. And you can use it every day. And they say, that's going to save me so much time. And then they go off and they use it. And we see that we go back into clients where 10 years later, they're still using it. We see it on flip charts they're using to brainstorm stuff. So, what my message to anyone listening to this, if you're struggling, is it is absolutely possible. You just need the tools.
Yeah. And I think that I love what you're saying too, because it's not really changing who you are. Like, you can still celebrate being an introvert, but just bring some tools into your toolkit that allow you to be assertive, or allow you to be a good presenter, or allow you to, you mentioned, I like the analogy that you gave earlier of not having the on-ramp into the conversation, right? And so here's your on-ramp, you're in a business meeting, here's how to get heard. Because unfortunately, again, the perception is someone's quiet. It's like they're either not ready, they're outmatched, they're in the wrong room, or they don't have anything to say, or they don't care. There's all these misconceptions when someone's not connecting and not verbalizing. We all kind of fill in the blanks with what that must mean, right? So,
Yeah.
Ken's not talking, that must mean he's not interested. Ken's not talking, that must mean he doesn't know what he's talking about. Ken's not talking, and I think if we don't control to some degree our own, the narrative around us, or the marketing around us, or kind of the branding around us, a little bit, especially in these bigger corporate jobs where it's so important, kind of what the perception is as far as, how you climb up. So I think that's really cool. So what about keeping it going? Now, I know you said it lasts and lasts, but you said your kind of flagship product is like a 2-day training. So I want to know a couple of things about that. First of all, what is your core demographic? We talked about it a little bit by accident when I was saying, hey, this would be great for so-and-so. Yeah. But is it any executive that maybe is struggling even a little bit in this area, or is it more for people who really consider themselves highly introverted? Like, kind of what's a typical client for you coming in?
Yeah, I mean, if I look back over 2 decades of who we've trained, most people that we've trained are probably aged between 35 to 50, where they are highly skilled in a technical profession. So, I mentioned some of them, but sort of like engineering, construction, telecoms, data, anything that's sort of they've got technical information that they need to share. And so they're not just struggling with being able to express themselves, but they've got content that's pretty difficult that they're dealing with as well. And so they'll bring us in for both, and they'll say, we need these people to have presence. They've got to have gravitas. They've got to represent us internally and externally. But also we've got this really complex information, and whoever we speak to, if we're speaking to non-technical people, they're lost. And so we go in and we work with them. We're often working on leadership development programs, and we'll do a rollout for a certain level of leadership within a business. We're occasionally working with sort of CEO level and are their direct reports. But also at the other side, something I've loved to do too is we've worked with like MBA students who are 23 years old potentially, and they're right at the start of really wanting to launch their career to another level. So it's nice to be able to work with them too, to say, this is the stuff that you need to do to get to where, on that sort of meteoric rise that you're hoping for in your career. But it is generally, I'd say, positioned around entrepreneurs, leaders, that sort of level within an organization where people have to make things happen.
That's really cool. I had a question for you. So I've had, especially in my corporate career, again, I'm drawn a lot of times to the smart, introverted people. Like, I want to know what's going on there, right? And I'm like, they got something more going on. And that led me to get really interested in Six Sigma and process improvement and things like that, continuous improvement. Not so much that I was the expert. I got kind of lightly trained in that area, but I would surround myself, especially as I rose through the ranks, I would surround myself with people that were really good in that field, because I found them to be super valuable, right? And so these were people that could sometimes take a look at something that we were doing operationally across 300 different cost centers and go, hey, if you're able to change this one metric. But to your point, they weren't great at delivering that information. They were good at finding it. And so I guess where I'm going with here in terms of a question is, I try to train those people into, those people were great to me at finding answers that a operational or sales leader might send them to get. So in other words, maybe I go to my Six Sigma guys, my data analysis guys, whatever, and say, I need to find 2 more gross margin points over the next 6 months in this particular product category. And here's some areas you might want to go down to look at that. And then they'd come back and go, here's what we found, right? And that was great. What I was trying to get them to, and struggling with this personality type, again, the engineers, the data analysis, was the beauty is not in finding the data. The beauty is in knowing what question to ask. Do you know what I mean? So I was trying to
Yeah.
get them to take their analytical brains, which were beautiful, and like keep those intact. But now what do you do with the information? How do you leverage the information? How does this information now lead to the next question? Do you guys dive into that much, or have you in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it reminds me of there's a client we're working with at the moment who's in the food industry, and they said that they get frustrated because the people on their data team will get asked a question like, "Give me the number for this," and they'll go back to the person and say, "But why do you need the number?" They'll say, "Just give me the number. I just need the number." And so they give them the number, and then bad decisions are made because the person doesn't understand the context of the number. And
Right.
so what we often do is we go into a company and say, data storytelling is critical because you have to understand what is the context and the meaning behind this. Where did the number come from? Where is it going? What is it in relation to? So that you can then make a decision about it. And so we love being able to turn like a statistic, if you like, into a story so that people, particularly like if you've got leaders in a business and they're asking for a number, it's because they want to make a decision. And to make that decision, they don't actually need the number. They need the story about the number.
Yep.
And so we show them how do you turn it into a story that someone can make a decision from, and that's a lovely process to do. And in order to do that, you need to know, well, what elements of the story are required here. And so we teach people, the questioning and listening skills that are required to figure out what is the reason behind them needing this number. What is the challenge they're facing right now? What could that lead to if they don't get the answer they need, or if they don't make a decision? What goal are they looking to achieve? What's more important to them? Is it the cost? Is it the time involved? Is there a business value that's at stake in this situation? And what could that lead to? What would be the best possible outcome? And how does this data fit into that journey? So we talk about, one of the key things we talk about here is a mentor mindset. When you're talking to people, is to figure out, okay, whoever has asked me for a piece of data, they're the hero. They're on a journey and they're trying to get the thing that's going to help them achieve their goal. They've got challenges right now. They've got goals they want to achieve. And they're coming to me for this data because they think that will help them get them to their destination. But actually what you need to give them is maybe the data wrapped in a story, because that's really what's going to help them overcome the current challenges and achieve their goals.
I love it. Even when you started talking about the hero's journey, I'm thinking of like a game board or something, and going, you can either give them the key that unlocks the next step or give them the map that might unlock the next 5, right? I mean, that's kind of what was going on in my head as you were saying that. And I'm thinking about my own team right now. And about a month ago, we have a lot of, I mentioned to you before the call that we're in talent acquisition, for leadership positions. And so we talk to a lot of candidates, recruit a lot of candidates. We have a lot of data points in our business, and a lot of things that could go wrong because there's a lot of automation in terms of how we reach out to people and things like that. And so, I individually was going and having to every day look at systems, is this working? Is this working? Is this working? Is this working? And then, so next evolution of that was have someone on the team put that together, create a dashboard. And now the next evolution of that, and this is what I'm really talking about, is to now tell me the story, right? And that is what we're doing right now, is I'm like, don't give the data to me so that I can then create a story. You tell me what the data is telling you, based on what I'm seeing in the data. Here's what I see. Here's what I recommend. Here's a path. Because that to me is real value for our analytical people out there. Is I think if you're someone that can deliver consistently good work, then great. That's going to get you to a certain level. But unless you can start leveraging that work into a story like what you're saying, you're going to be stuck at that level forever, and you're maybe going to get merit increases every year. But if you can start leveraging it into, here's what I think we should do next, or based on all of this, based on this story behind this data, because then you can start anticipating, if let's say you're supporting the hero, like in the way that you're training people, what do you think the hero is going to do with this story? Because you might be able to help them in that decision-making process. And all of a sudden, instead of being a gopher that's digging up data, you're a trusted partner that's helping pave the way now. It's Batman and Robin instead of just Batman, right? So
exactly. Yeah. I think, it's worthwhile people reflecting on this, given the demographic that listen to your podcast, the way I see it, great leaders are great storytellers. And so if you are an entrepreneur, being able to tell the story of your business and the challenges that people face and the extraordinary goals that you can help them achieve, being able to tell that story in a way that is utterly compelling and convincing and confident is the ticket to that business being a success. And, I've seen that in my own business over the last 23 years. I'm really proud of taking this from a hobby up to the point where, it's a multi-million-pound organization and we've grown every single year. And it's coming down to that power of just going into each company and telling a story. And then leaders need to be able to tell the story to people in challenging times. We've been through challenging times the last couple of years, certainly. Tell the story of like, where are we at? Give it some meaning. What does it really mean? And where would we go if we made the wrong decision? And where can we go? And how are we going to get there? And get people on board with that story and tell it in such a way that everyone who leaves that room can cascade that same story. So, when I talk about being great storytellers too, it's importantly, it's not about some people think, it means going into a room and saying, well, when I was a boy back in the summer of 94 or whatever it is, it's not that kind of story. It's being able to turn any decision, any key piece of information into a compelling story that makes sense for people, because our minds love receiving information through a story. If you go to a PowerPoint presentation, you can listen to hundreds of data points and not remember any of them a few days later. But, if you go to the movies, or if you go and listen to someone doing a really good TED talk or something, you can remember what they said years later and recite some of the key points to other people as well. So, being able to understand how do you do that as a leader is critical to people's success.
I agree. No, I love how it all ties together and the training that you're doing. Now, tell me, what are some other ways that people can get in contact with you and use your services in training? Because I know you're an author. I know you've done, a bunch of different stuff. So fill us in on the rest.
Yeah, sure. So my new book is about to come out. This comes out actually May the 2nd. We've got an ebook, audiobook, hardback book, Lift Your Impact. And Lift Your Impact is essentially 23 years worth of teaching put into 200 pages or so, where I thought, what is it if leaders really want to make a difference, if they want to be able to elevate the work that their team is doing, if they want to start a new project, if they want to do something meaningful and purposeful and leave a good legacy behind them, what do they need? They need to have a powerful mindset, they need to have fantastic communication skills, and they need to know how to keep the momentum going that's actually going to get them where they want to go long term. And so that's what I put into the book. So if people want to go to liftyourimpact.com/the book, then there's loads of information there. There's a video all about the book and so on. And people can find out more about me and information there. People can also connect with me on LinkedIn. So on LinkedIn, I'm Richard Newman from Body Talk. Body Talk is my main training company. And I'm also on Instagram if people are preferring there, which is Richard Newman Speaks.
Cool. And we'll put all of that in the show notes. Let me ask you before I let you go, though, I'm curious. Since the book's about to come out, when does it officially release?
So May the 2nd, it officially comes out.
Oh, cool. By the time this podcast releases, it'll be out then, which is cool. And they can find it on Amazon and everywhere else?
Yeah, Barnes & Noble, Porchlight, wherever people want to get books, they can probably find it.
What was it? Talk to me just a little bit about, I've heard writing a book is one of the toughest things you can do. And I've written a couple of chapters in other people's books. I've been kind of a contributor, which was easy because it was more like me getting interviewed and then someone else putting it together. But I've never, tell me about that process. What was that like?
Yeah, I imagine I've never had the opportunity to do what you've done. My wife has done it, where you get to contribute a couple of chapters. So I'll talk through her perspective, because she has her own book and she's also contributed. And I think that, if you think about making a baby, when you contribute a couple of chapters to someone else's book, it's like being the dad in that process. the author's doing the bit of the mother. But I think, I created a book previously 5 years ago, and I had, a bit like childbirth, I'd sort of forgotten how hard it is, the process. So, I pitched the book to my publisher back in January of last year. We got the agreement. I then, I was writing it throughout last year. I then had 3 grueling months of editing with my brilliant editor, Cheryl at McGraw-Hill. And then we've had 5 months since then recording the audiobook and figuring out the PR campaign behind it. There's so much that goes into this that I would say, it's a worthwhile journey if you like being creative, but it is a marathon. Yeah. And, only go about it if you're really confident. You got something you want to share with the world, I'd say go for it. I'm super proud of the previous book. I'm really proud of this book, and can't wait for people to get it.
The analogy you gave is perfect. The whole, you know, I'm the dad. Sorry, I can't feed the baby in the middle of the night, right? That's you. I'd love to, but I can't. You know, I can only do so much, right? So I love that analogy. And I'm curious on the audiobook, since you said you spent a lot of time with it, I assume it's going to be you narrating then the audiobook?
It is, yeah. And I must say, I loved the process of doing it. It could be just feeding into my preference for how I communicate, but I was locked in. If you imagine being locked in a broom cupboard that has no windows, completely painted black, and it just has a small stool and like a little desk lamp and an iPad with your book on it for 2 days. I think it was like 7 or 8 hours of recording per day to get the book there. But I loved it because it was going through this book that we had honed over the course of a year. And I was really pleased to be able to be the voice for this for everyone to listen to.
That'll probably be the medium that if I find a book and I like the voice of the author, I love listening to audiobooks. If it's someone else reading it, I feel like it's one of those industries where, I don't know if you ever listen to like Audible books or whatever, but it'll go. It literally sounds like even the pre-recording sounds like a guy from the 1950s, right? It'll say, "Welcome to Audible." And it's just some guy reading in a very monotone way. And it's very hard to get into it. But whenever the author reads, it's like a totally different experience. So I'm excited to listen to
I was really committed to that. And I have to say, like, if anyone is writing a book and they wanted to do that bit, don't be insulted if this happens to you. What happened to me, even though I'm writing the book, it's, and it's a book about communication, I had to audition to be the narrator because it's such a skill. In order to sit in a booth and read with perfect intonation and no stumbles and not too many sort of lip smacking noises or plosives or whatever, to be able to do that for 2 full days is quite an art. So, but it is worthwhile learning how to do that so you can author your book.
Well, I'm glad you passed the audition to read your own book because that's how I'm going to be consuming it for sure. Well, thank you so much. It was your pleasure to get to know you and hear your story a little bit. Thanks for all that you're doing to develop better leaders and make the world a better place. Appreciate having you on.
Thank you, Ken. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks so much.